Dawn's embrace, a villa awakens. The first light of dawn touches the marble columns of a villa perched above the Bay of Naples. If you've ever watched the sun rise over water, you know that moment when darkness yields to possibility, when the world seems to hold its breath before the day begins. This is how morning arrives at the home of Lucius Annaeus Seneca, though he doesn't yet know this will be his last. I know you understand that feeling of standing at the edge of something unknown. The weight you carry as a leader. It's not so different from what Seneca bore 2,000 years ago, the responsibility for others, the decisions that ripple far beyond yourself, the understanding that what you're building matters even when the cost feels impossibly high. But let me take you there, to that villa where philosophy met power, where wisdom was tested not in comfortable lecture halls but in the crucible of imperial Rome. The villa sits like a jewel against the volcanic slopes of Vesuvius, though the mountain sleeps peacefully this morning. Gardens cascade down terraced levels toward the sea, where fishing boats dot the horizon like scattered coins. The air carries the scent of jasmine and salt, mingling with the smoke from kitchen fires as servants begin their daily routines. Seneca designed this retreat himself, every detail reflecting his philosophy of thoughtful living. The rooms are spacious but not ostentatious. Beautiful, yes, but purposefully so. He believed that beauty should serve the soul, not merely display wealth. The library overlooks the water, positioned to catch the morning light. Scrolls line the walls, works of poetry, history, and philosophy from across the known world. This is where he wrote his letters, where he wrestled with the great questions that still keep us awake at night. How do we lead with integrity when the world demands compromise? How do we find peace when responsibility weighs heavy on our shoulders? How do we build something meaningful when forces beyond our control threaten everything we've worked for? You know these questions intimately. They're the ones that visit you at 2 a.m., aren't they? When the day's urgent tasks have finally quieted, but your mind refuses to follow suit. In the villa's main courtyard, water trickles from a fountain carved with dolphins. The sound is deliberately soothing. Seneca understood that the mind needs anchor points of calm. He would often sit here in the early morning, before the heat of the day and the weight of correspondence demanded his attention. This morning, he's already at his writing desk. At 67, Seneca moves with the careful precision of someone who has learned to husband his energy. His hair has silvered completely, and lines map the geography of a life spent navigating the treacherous currents of Roman politics. But his eyes remain sharp, alert to nuance and possibility. He's working on a letter to his friend Lucilius, as he has done for years. These aren't casual notes, but carefully crafted explorations of how to live well in an uncertain world. How fitting that on this particular morning, he writes about acceptance, about the difference between what we can control and what we must simply endure. Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions. His stylus moves across the wax tablet. The wise man is prepared for either. He pauses, looking out toward the bay, where the sun now paints the water in shades of gold and amber. Does he sense something in the air? Some shift in the cosmic order that governs the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of individual lives. The villa itself tells the story of a man caught between worlds. Here in the atrium, a bronze statue of Marcus Aurelius stands beside busts of Greek philosophers. Roman pragmatism and Stoic wisdom existing in careful balance. The floors are marble, yes, but not the most expensive available. The walls display frescoes, but their themes are contemplative rather than triumphant. This is the home of someone who has tasted power and wealth, who has advised emperors and accumulated vast riches, but who has also spent decades thinking deeply about what any of it actually means. You understand this tension, don't you? The strange duality of building something significant in the world while knowing that ultimately none of us controls the final outcome. The responsibility to create value, to provide for others, to leave something worthwhile behind, balanced against the ancient wisdom that reminds us how little we truly command. Seneca lived this paradox more intensely than most. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, yet he wrote extensively about the dangers of attachment to material things. He advised an emperor, yet he understood better than anyone how precarious such positions could be. He built a philosophical legacy that would outlast the empire itself, yet he knew that morning might come when none of it would matter. In the kitchen, servants prepare the simple breakfast Seneca prefers: bread, olives, cheese, watered wine. He has never been one for elaborate meals, finding that heavy food clouds the mind. This preference for simplicity isn't affectation, it's practical philosophy. When you've seen how quickly circumstances can change, you learn not to depend too heavily on luxury. The head gardener brings word that the roses are blooming magnificently this year. Seneca nods, pleased but not surprised. He chose each plant in these gardens personally, understanding that beauty, like wisdom, requires both patience and proper conditions to flourish. But even as he discusses the roses, part of his attention remains on the letter he's writing. The words feel particularly important this morning, though he couldn't say exactly why. Perhaps it's simply the recognition that every letter might be the last. Every morning might be the final dawn we're granted to share whatever wisdom we've managed to accumulate. The willing, destiny guides them. The unwilling, destiny drags them. He's quoted this line from Cleanthes many times, but this morning it seems to resonate with unusual clarity. We all face moments when the currents of fate grow stronger than our ability to swim against them. The question isn't whether such moments will come, it's how we'll meet them when they do. From his study window, Seneca can see the road that winds up from the port, usually empty at this hour, save for the occasional farmer heading to market. But this morning, something catches his eye. A small cloud of dust in the distance, moving with purpose rather than the lazy pace of commerce. He sets down his stylus and watches more carefully. Years of political life have taught him to notice such details. In the imperial court, survival often depends on reading the subtle signs that precede dramatic change. The dust cloud resolves into a small party of riders. Even from this distance, their urgency is unmistakable. They ride not like merchants or messengers carrying routine correspondence, but with the focused intensity of men bearing news that cannot wait. A servant appears at his shoulder, having noticed the same disturbance. Shall I alert the household master? Seneca considers this. In his position, unexpected visitors often bring unwelcome news. But running from such news has never changed its nature, only delayed its arrival. Let them come, he says quietly. Whatever they carry, we'll meet it with dignity. The riders are closer now. Close enough to see the imperial insignia on their cloaks. Seneca's expression doesn't change, but something subtle shifts in his posture. He has served 3 emperors. He knows how quickly favor can turn to suspicion, how easily yesterday's trusted advisor becomes tomorrow's perceived threat. The morning light, so beautiful just moments ago, seems to take on a different quality. Still golden, still warm on the marble columns and garden paths, but somehow more precious now, more finite. This is how change arrives, isn't it? Not with dramatic fanfare, but quietly, on a beautiful morning when we're focused on other things. One moment you're writing about wisdom and acceptance, planning your day, thinking about roses in bloom. The next, riders appear on the horizon, carrying news that will reshape everything you thought you knew about your future. The weight you carry as a leader. It includes this knowledge that circumstances can shift without warning, that the empire you're building, whether literal or metaphorical, exists always at the mercy of forces larger than yourself. Seneca returns to his letter, but his words now carry a different energy. We must prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life, he writes. We must postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The stylus moves more deliberately now, each word chosen with particular care. Outside, he can hear the approaching hoofbeats, growing louder with each passing moment. But here, in this villa where philosophy meets the practical demands of living, where wisdom is tested against the realities of power and responsibility, Seneca continues writing. Not because he doesn't understand what's coming, but because he understands it perfectly. The morning sun climbs higher, painting everything in that particular light that seems to make ordinary moments luminous. The fountain continues its gentle murmur. The roses bloom in defiance of whatever news approaches on the Roman road. And in his study, a man who has spent decades thinking about how to live well prepares to discover how well he has learned his own lessons. The emperor's decree, A Stoic's response. The riders reach the villa gates as the sun finds its full strength. Their horses are lathered with sweat and dust from the road, steam rising from their flanks in the morning air. The lead messenger dismounts with the careful precision of a man who has delivered many imperial communications and knows the weight they carry. Seneca's steward receives them at the entrance, his face betraying nothing. But you and I, we know that look, don't we? The careful composure of someone who must absorb shocking news and then decide how to share it. How many times have you worn that same expression, walking back to your office after a difficult phone call, knowing you'll need to gather your team and explain that the funding fell through, or the partnership collapsed, or the market shifted overnight? The sealed scroll bears Nero's personal mark. The wax is still soft from the imperial ring. Inside his study, Seneca sets down his reed pen. Not hurriedly, but with the deliberate care of someone who understands that some moments deserve our full attention. He has been expecting this. Perhaps not today, perhaps not in this exact form, but he has been expecting it nonetheless. You see, those of us who build something meaningful, who dare to think differently, who accumulate any form of influence or success, we learn to read the signs, the subtle shifts in how people speak to us, the meetings we're no longer invited to, the whispered conversations that stop when we enter the room. Seneca has felt these currents changing around the imperial court for months now. The steward approaches with measured steps across the marble floor. His sandals echo softly in the morning stillness. Birds still sing in the garden outside. The fountain still murmurs its ancient song. Life continues its rhythm, even as individual lives hang in the balance. A message from Rome, master, from the emperor himself. Seneca nods, extending his hand. The scroll feels heavier than it should, weighted with imperial authority and whatever judgment it contains. He breaks the seal with steady fingers. The words on the parchment are formal, legal, final. Accusations of conspiracy against the throne, claims of betrayal and treasonous correspondence. The language is precise, bureaucratic, designed to create an official record that will satisfy history's requirements for due process. But beneath the formal phrases lies a simpler truth. Nero has decided that his former teacher, his one-time mentor, has become inconvenient, perhaps too influential, perhaps too independent in his thinking, perhaps simply too much of a reminder of the philosophical principles the young emperor has chosen to abandon. Seneca reads the decree once, then again. His face remains composed, though something shifts behind his eyes. Not fear, something deeper. The recognition that arrives when a long-anticipated moment finally presents itself. The punishment is death, but offered with a peculiar Roman courtesy. He may choose the manner of his departure from this world, a final gesture of respect for his former position, or perhaps simply Nero's way of avoiding the messiness of a public execution. And here, in this moment, we see something remarkable, something that speaks directly to you, lying there in the darkness, carrying the weight you carry. Seneca doesn't rage against the injustice. He doesn't scramble for alternatives or begin drafting desperate appeals. He doesn't curse the gods or question why good intentions and honest service have led to this end. Instead, he does something far more difficult and far more powerful. He accepts what he cannot change. This is not resignation. It's something much more profound. It's the practical application of everything he has spent decades teaching and writing about. The moment when philosophy stops being abstract theory and becomes lived reality. You know this challenge, don't you? Not in such dramatic terms, perhaps, but you know what it means to face circumstances beyond your control. The investor who pulls out at the last minute. The key team member who leaves for a competitor. The regulation that changes overnight and threatens everything you've built. The global pandemic that reshapes entire industries in a matter of weeks. In those moments, we have a choice. We can exhaust ourselves fighting against what has already happened, or we can direct our energy toward what we can still influence. Seneca, reading Nero's decree in the morning light of his villa, chooses the path of the Stoic. He sets the scroll aside and walks to the window overlooking his garden. The roses are in full bloom now, their petals soft and perfect in the growing warmth. A gardener moves among them with quiet efficiency, tending to what needs tending. The man doesn't know that his master has just received a death sentence. He simply continues the work of cultivation and care. There's profound wisdom in that image. The gardener tends his roses not because he can guarantee they'll bloom forever, but because the tending itself has meaning. You tend what you're building not because you can control every outcome, but because the building itself, the creating itself, the attempt itself has inherent worth. Seneca understands this deeply. He has spent his life cultivating wisdom the way his gardener cultivates roses. Patiently, consistently, with attention to what promotes growth and what needs to be pruned away. Now, facing his final test, he discovers whether that cultivation has taken root. He calls for his wife, Pompeia Paulina. She comes quickly, perhaps sensing something in his tone. When he shows her the decree, her reaction is immediate and fierce. She will not be separated from him. If he must leave this world, she will accompany him. It's a gesture of love so complete, so uncompromising, that it stops him short. Here we see another dimension of the weight we carry as leaders, as builders, as people who dare to matter to others. Our choices ripple outward, affecting those who have chosen to link their lives with ours. The decisions we make in our darkest moments become part of their story too. Seneca finds himself in an impossible position. He has accepted his own fate with philosophical calm, but now he must grapple with the consequences for someone he loves. The Stoic principles that give him strength in facing death seem inadequate when applied to his wife's grief and determination. They talk quietly in the garden, walking among the roses they have tended together. What they say to each other remains private, lost to history, but we can imagine the conversation, the gentle arguments about duty and love, the practical discussions about what comes next, the silences that say more than words. This is leadership too, isn't it? Not the kind they teach in business schools or write about in management books, but the real kind. The kind that happens when everything is falling apart and people are looking to you not for answers you don't have, but for some evidence that it's possible to face uncertainty with grace. As the morning progresses, word spreads quietly through the household. The servants continue their duties, but with a subdued quality, the way people move when they sense that something significant is shifting. The cook still prepares the midday meal. The gardener still tends his roses. The steward still manages the daily operations of the villa. Life insists on continuing, even in the shadow of ending. Seneca spends time with each member of his household, speaking quietly, offering what comfort and guidance he can. He dictates final letters to distant friends. He reviews his will, making small adjustments to ensure his affairs are properly settled. He moves through these tasks with the same methodical attention he has always brought to his responsibilities. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing of all. Facing death unjustly imposed, he doesn't abandon his principles or his care for others. He doesn't become bitter or careless or cruel. Instead, he becomes more himself, more thoughtful, more generous, more present to the moment and the people in it. The afternoon light slants differently through the windows now, golden, but with the particular quality that suggests the day is beginning its turn toward evening. Time, which seemed suspended in the morning's shock, begins to move again with quiet insistence. And Seneca, having spent his life thinking about how to live well, prepares to demonstrate how to leave well. You understand something of this, don't you? Not the dramatic finality, perhaps, but the principle underneath it. The recognition that how we handle our endings, the end of projects, relationships, phases of our lives, reveals something essential about who we are. Whether we can maintain our integrity when everything we've built is being taken away. Whether we can be generous when we have every reason to be bitter. Whether we can find meaning in the midst of loss. These are the tests that matter, not the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us. Hacked. Gathering of minds, philosophical discourse. And so, within the hour, they begin to arrive. First Lucilius, his closest friend, and the recipient of so many of those morning letters. Then the younger philosophers who have gathered around Seneca's teachings over the years. Word travels quietly through the villa's corridors, and soon the atrium fills with the soft murmur of voices. Not the frantic whispers of crisis, but something altogether different. You've experienced this yourself, haven't you? Those moments when your team rallies, not because you've asked them to, but because they understand what you're facing. When the people who matter most show up without being summoned. There's something profound about how adversity reveals the true bonds we've built. the relationships that transcend mere professional obligation. Seneca moves among them with remarkable composure. His friends expect to find him devastated, perhaps raging against the injustice of Nero's decree. Instead, they discover a man who seems almost liberated, as if the weight of uncertainty has finally been lifted from his shoulders. "My friends," he says, settling into his familiar chair beneath the olive tree where so many of these conversations have taken place over the years, "we find ourselves with an unexpected gift today. Time to speak freely about the things that matter most." The irony isn't lost on any of them. Here, facing death, they have perhaps more freedom than they've known in years. No need to measure words carefully for imperial ears, no political calculations, just the pure pursuit of truth and understanding. Young Marcus Aeneas speaks first, his voice tight with emotion. "Master, surely there must be some appeal, some way to reason with the emperor." But Seneca raises a gentle hand. "Tell me, Marcus, what have we spent these years discussing? What is the central premise of everything we've explored together? That we cannot control external events, only our responses to them." "Precisely. And what would it say about our philosophy if we abandoned it the moment it was truly tested?" This is the conversation you need to hear tonight, as you lie there turning over the challenges that feel insurmountable. The weight you carry, the decisions that keep you awake, they're testing the same fundamental principle. Not whether you can control the outcome, but whether you can maintain your integrity while pursuing it. Lucilius leans forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "But Seneca, you've done nothing wrong. This accusation of conspiracy, everyone knows it's false." "Does it matter?" Seneca's response is immediate, almost cheerful. "Think about what we've learned from the great philosophers who came before us. Did Socrates spend his final hours protesting his innocence, or did he use that time to explore the nature of death itself?" The group falls silent, contemplating this. Around them, the villa continues its quiet rhythm. Servants move discreetly, ensuring everyone has wine, bread, the small comforts that make conversation possible. Paulina appears periodically, her presence both graceful and determined. She doesn't hover, but her support is unmistakable. "I want to tell you something," Seneca continues, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience. "For years, I've written about virtue, about courage, about accepting what we cannot change. But I've written from a position of relative safety. Today, I get to discover whether those words were mere philosophy or actual wisdom. This distinction matters more than you might realize. How often do we speak confidently about principles we've never truly tested, about resilience we've never needed, about courage we've never been forced to demonstrate? The weight you carry right now, it's offering you the same opportunity Seneca faced, the chance to discover what you're actually made of." Gaius Silvanus, one of the younger disciples, asks the question they're all thinking. "Are you afraid?" Seneca considers this carefully. "Of pain? Yes, I think any honest person would be. Of the unknown, perhaps, but of death itself." He pauses, gazing out toward the bay where fishing boats are returning with the day's catch. "How can I fear returning to the same state I was in before I was born? Did that trouble me then?" The simplicity of this logic is startling. Fear, they begin to understand, comes largely from imagining loss, from projecting ourselves into a future where we no longer exist, and somehow feeling sorry for that non-existent self. "But what about everything you're leaving unfinished?" Marcus presses. "Your writings, your students, the work you've yet to do." Now Seneca smiles, and it's the expression of a teacher who's been waiting for exactly this question. "Tell me, when a farmer plants seeds in spring, does he rage against winter? When an architect designs a building, does he mourn that he won't design every building that will ever be built? The metaphor settles over them like a gentle blanket. Everything has its season. Every project, every relationship, every phase of what we're building. They all have natural cycles. The tragedy isn't in the ending, but in failing to appreciate what we had while we had it. I've been extraordinarily fortunate," Seneca continues. "I've had time to develop ideas, to share them with brilliant minds like yours, to see some of them take root in the world. How many people can say that? How many get to choose their final chapter rather than having it chosen by disease or accident? This perspective shift is crucial for you to absorb tonight. The weight you carry. It's not just burden. It's also privilege. The responsibility you feel, the pressure that keeps your mind racing. It exists because you've built something worth protecting, because people depend on what you've created, because your decisions matter. Paulina joins them now, taking her place beside her husband with quiet dignity. Her presence changes the dynamic subtly. This isn't just philosophical discourse anymore. It's a family facing an impossible situation together. "I've been thinking," she says, her voice steady, "about something you wrote last year, about how we practice for difficulties when life is easy, so we're prepared when it becomes hard." Seneca nods. "The exercises we've done, imagining loss, contemplating mortality, questioning our attachments, they weren't morbid games, they were preparation for exactly this moment. This is why the ancient Stoics spent time each day contemplating setbacks, losses, even death, not to become pessimistic, but to build the mental resilience needed when those challenges actually arrived, like a muscle that grows stronger through resistance training." "So what do we do now?" Lucilius asks. "How do we honor what you've taught us?" "By living it," Seneca replies immediately. "By taking these principles back into your own lives and testing them against real challenges. By remembering that philosophy isn't about sounding wise, it's about becoming wise." The afternoon light is beginning to shift, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. Time feels both suspended and precious. Each moment of this conversation carries weight because everyone understands how few such moments remain. "I want each of you to consider something," Seneca says, his gaze moving from face to face. "What would it mean to live without the fear of loss? Not recklessly, but freely. What would you attempt if you weren't constantly calculating what might be taken away?" The question hangs in the air like incense. Around the circle, you can see minds working, imaginations stirring. Because this is the ultimate Stoic insight, that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our desperate attempts to control what happens to us. "Master," young Marcus says slowly, "are you saying that accepting this decree, it's actually a form of freedom?" "What do you think?" Seneca asks, turning the question back to his student, as he's done countless times before. I think when we stop fighting what we cannot change, we free up all that energy for what we actually can influence. And what can you influence, even now? How I respond, how I treat others, what I choose to focus on, whether I act with courage or fear. This is the conversation your mind needs tonight. Not the endless loop of problems and calculations, but this deeper recognition. The weight you carry. Yes, it's real. Yes, it matters. But your power lies not in controlling every outcome, but in choosing your response to whatever comes. As the day progresses toward evening, their discussion continues to deepen. They talk about legacy, not the kind measured in monuments or wealth, but the kind that lives on in how we've influenced others to think and act. They explore the nature of time, how a life's value isn't determined by its length, but by its depth and impact. Most importantly, they demonstrate something profound about community, how the people who truly matter don't abandon us when things become difficult. They draw closer. They help us remember who we are when circumstances threaten to overwhelm our sense of identity. This is what you need to remember as you finally allow your mind to settle tonight. You're not facing the weight you carry alone. The principles that have guided you this far, they don't disappear when tested. They reveal their true strength. Ritual cleansing, preparing for the end. The warmth of human connection sustains us. But there comes a moment when we must turn inward. When the conversations have been had, the wisdom shared, the love expressed, there remains the deeply personal work of preparing ourselves for whatever lies ahead. Seneca understood this. As the afternoon light began to slant through the windows of his villa, casting longer shadows across the marble floors, he quietly excused himself from his gathered friends. Not abruptly, not with drama or ceremony, simply with the gentle authority of someone who knows what must be done. "I need a few moments," he said, his voice carrying that particular quality you might recognize. The tone we use when we're not asking for permission, but gently creating the space we need. His wife Paulina squeezed his hand. His disciples nodded with understanding. They would wait. They would be there when he returned. But first, this necessary solitude. You know this feeling, don't you? After the meetings, after the difficult conversations, after you've given everything you have to the people and problems that depend on you, there's still that moment when you must face yourself, when you must prepare your own mind and spirit for what comes next. Seneca walked slowly through his villa, past the scrolls and tablets where he'd written so many letters about virtue and wisdom, past the garden where he'd walked countless mornings in contemplation. His steps were measured, deliberate, not the hurried pace of someone avoiding reality, but the careful rhythm of someone moving toward acceptance. He called for his body servant, an elderly man who had attended him for years. "Prepare a bath," Seneca requested quietly. "Use the good oils, the ones from Syria, and ensure the water is properly heated." The servant nodded, understanding without words that this was not an ordinary request. There was something in his master's tone, a finality that spoke louder than any explanation. He went about his preparations with unusual care, as if each detail mattered more than it ever had before. In your own life, you've probably noticed how certain moments demand this kind of attention. When you're preparing for a presentation that could determine your company's future, when you're about to have a conversation that might change everything, when you're facing a decision that will affect not just you, but everyone who depends on you. There's a quality of presence that emerges, a heightened awareness of each action, each breath. This is what Seneca moved into now, not panic, not the frantic energy of someone trying to escape their fate, but a deep, almost ceremonial mindfulness. The ancient Romans understood something we sometimes forget in our hurried modern world, that preparation of the body and spirit are inseparable, that how we tend to ourselves in crucial moments reflects our deepest values. The bath was drawn in a room overlooking the bay. Steam rose from the heated water, carrying the scent of carefully chosen oils. Lavender for peace, rosemary for remembrance, frankincense for the sacred nature of transition. The servant had lit oil lamps around the room, their gentle flames creating a warm, contemplative atmosphere. Seneca stood for a moment at the window, looking out over the water he had gazed upon every morning for years. The bay stretched before him, its surface catching the late afternoon light like scattered gold coins. Fishing boats moved slowly across the distant water, their occupants going about the ordinary business of life, unaware that one of Rome's greatest philosophers was preparing for his final act of courage just beyond their sight. "The view never changes," he murmured to himself, "yet it's never the same twice." This is the paradox you live with every day, isn't it? The fundamental challenges of leadership, of building something meaningful, they remain constant. The need to make difficult decisions, to carry responsibility for others, to find strength when you feel depleted. These are as old as human civilization. Yet each time you face them, the circumstances are unique. Each time requires a fresh application of timeless principles. Seneca began to undress slowly, removing the toga that marked his status as a Roman senator, the ring that signified his wealth and position, the external symbols of a life lived in service to empire and philosophy. Each item was set aside with deliberate care, not discarded but honored for what it had represented. As he stepped into the warm water, there was an audible sigh, not of resignation but of release. The heat enveloped his aging body, easing muscles that had carried decades of tension. He settled back against the marble edge of the bath, closing his eyes, allowing himself to simply be present, with the sensation of warmth and buoyancy. This is what your body craves after those endless days, after the decisions and the pressure and the constant vigilance. Not escape from responsibility, but a moment of pure physical ease. A chance to remember that beneath all the roles you play, all the weight you carry, you are still a human being deserving of gentleness. The water lapped quietly against the sides of the bath. Somewhere in the distance, Seneca could hear the muted voices of his friends, still gathered in the main hall. Their presence was a comfort, knowing that he was cared for, that his life had mattered to people he respected. But here, in this moment of solitude, he could focus on the internal work that only he could do. He thought about the letters he had written over the years, thousands of words about virtue and resilience, about finding peace in the midst of chaos. How many times had he counseled others to accept what they could not control? How many times had he written about the importance of facing difficulty with dignity? Now those words would be tested in the crucible of his own experience. There's something profoundly honest about these moments of reckoning, isn't there? When all the theories and philosophies and carefully constructed strategies must prove themselves against reality. When you discover whether the principles you've espoused actually sustain you when everything is on the line. Seneca reached for a cloth and began to wash himself slowly, methodically. This, too, was part of the preparation, not just philosophical, but deeply practical. The Romans believed that cleanliness of body reflected clarity of spirit. That attention to physical details demonstrated respect for the sacred nature of human existence. As he moved the cloth over his arms, his chest, he was aware of each sensation with unusual intensity. The texture of the linen, the slickness of the oil-infused water, the play of light on wet skin. It was as if his senses had been heightened by proximity to the ultimate transition. Everything felt more vivid, more present, more real. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Master," came the voice of his servant. "The physician has arrived." Ah, the physician. Seneca had known this moment would come. When the method of death was left to the condemned, Roman law required medical supervision to ensure the process was carried out properly, to witness that justice had been served. It was a grim bureaucracy, but one that transformed even execution into a formal procedure. "Tell him I will be with him shortly," Seneca replied, his voice steady, "and ask him to wait in the study. I have a few more moments here." The footsteps receded. Seneca remained in the bath, but something had shifted. The arrival of the physician made everything more immediate, more real. The philosophical discussions, the emotional farewells, the ritual cleansing, all of it had been preparation for this next phase. "He thought about you, actually. Though of course he couldn't know you personally. He thought about everyone who would face their own moments of ultimate testing. Not necessarily death, but those crucibles where character is revealed and principles are proven. The moment when you have to decide whether to compromise your values to save your business, or stand by them and accept the consequences. The moment when you must choose between personal comfort and doing what's right for the people who depend on you. These are the moments that define us, aren't they? Not the easy victories or the comfortable successes, but the times when we must reach deep into ourselves and find resources we weren't sure we possessed." Seneca stood slowly in the bath, water streaming from his body. He felt clean, not just physically but spiritually prepared. The ritual had done its work. He was ready for whatever came next, not because he was eager for death, but because he had done everything possible to meet it with dignity. As he dried himself with a soft linen towel, he thought about the people in the next room, his wife, his friends, his students. They were waiting for him, and he would not keep them waiting long. But this time of solitude, this careful preparation, had been necessary. Some work can only be done alone. The physician's presence in his house felt like the ticking of a clock, marking time, creating urgency. But Seneca refused to be hurried. He dressed carefully in a simple tunic, clean, dignified, but without ornamentation. He combed his hair and beard with the same attention he had always paid to his appearance. If this was to be his final performance, it would be executed with the same care he had brought to everything else in his life. Standing before the bronze mirror in his dressing chamber, he looked at himself honestly. An old man, certainly, lined and weathered by decades of public service and private study. But his eyes were clear, his bearing was upright. Whatever fear he felt was held in check by a lifetime of philosophical practice. "This is who I am," he said quietly to his reflection. "This is who I have always been." And with that acknowledgement, that final moment of self-recognition, he was ready to face what came next. The inevitable act, a test of resolve. The water in the basin had grown cool by the time he finished. The physician waited patiently in the adjoining chamber, his medical instruments arranged with the same careful precision that Seneca brought to his philosophical writings. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the villa's marble floors, shadows that seemed to stretch toward evening with unusual haste. But there was no hurry in Seneca's movements as he dried his hands and face, no trembling in his fingers as he adjusted his simple tunic. The weight he had carried for so many years, the burden of serving an increasingly unstable emperor, the responsibility of guiding a young man's moral education while watching him descend into tyranny, That weight had transformed into something else entirely. Not lightness, exactly, but clarity. You know this feeling, perhaps. Not the extremity of his circumstances, certainly, but that moment when a difficult decision crystallizes into inevitable action, when the weight you carry shifts from uncertainty to resolve, when what you're building demands a choice that cannot be delayed or delegated or wished away. He found Paulina waiting for him in their private chambers. She had dismissed the servants and sat quietly by the window, her own face bearing the same composed determination he had glimpsed in his reflection. 40 years of marriage had created a language between them that required few words. "You've decided," she said. "It wasn't a question." "The decision was made for us," he replied, settling beside her on the simple wooden bench they had shared through countless conversations. "We can only choose how we respond to it." She nodded slowly, her fingers finding his with the natural ease of decades. "Then I choose to respond as your wife, as your partner in philosophy as well as life." The words hung between them, carrying implications that would have shattered a lesser love. But theirs had been forged in the furnace of stoic principle, tempered by shared study of what it meant to live well, and by extension, what it might mean to die well. "Paulina," he began, but she silenced him with a gentle pressure of her hand. "Do you remember," she said, "when we first read Cato's story together, how we debated whether his choice was courage or surrender?" Seneca did remember. They had been young then, or younger at least, full of theoretical understanding, but untested by real adversity. The question had seemed academic, a philosophical puzzle to be solved through careful reasoning. "I thought it was surrender," he admitted. "I argued that life itself was the gift to be preserved, that wisdom lay in endurance rather than escape. And I argued it was the ultimate expression of freedom," she replied, "the final assertion of human dignity against tyranny's reach." They sat in silence, watching the light shift across the floor. Somewhere in the villa, they could hear the quiet movements of their household. Servants going about their duties, perhaps friends still gathered in the library, the physician preparing his instruments with professional care. "We were both right," Paulina said finally, "and both wrong. It isn't about surrender or freedom. It's about integrity, about remaining true to who we are, even when, especially when, the world demands we become something else." This is what the ancient philosophers understood, and what those of us who carry weight in the modern world sometimes forget. That our deepest challenges are rarely about external circumstances. They're about maintaining our essential selves when pressure mounts, when easier paths beckon, when the cost of integrity seems impossibly high. Seneca had spent his life teaching this principle. Now he would demonstrate it. The physician entered at their summons, his face grave but professional. He had served in this capacity before, though rarely under such circumstances. The method would be swift and certain, the opening of veins in warm water, allowing consciousness to fade gradually into that final sleep. "Both of us," Paulina said quietly, and the physician's composure wavered for just a moment. "My lady, perhaps—" "Both of us," Seneca confirmed. "We have lived as partners in philosophy. We will complete this journey the same way." What followed was conducted with the same dignity that had marked their life together. No dramatics, no final speeches for posterity, simply two people who had spent decades preparing for this moment, applying their deepest convictions when it mattered most. They spoke quietly as the physician made his preparations, about the garden they had planted together and whether the olive trees would bear fruit next season, about the letters Seneca had written that morning and whether they would reach their intended recipients, about the students who would carry forward their teachings, adapting ancient wisdom to new circumstances. "Do you think," Paulina asked, "that we've built something that will last?" It was the question that haunts every leader, every founder, every person who has poured their life into creating something larger than themselves. Will the weight we carry, the sacrifices we make, the principles we uphold, will any of it matter when we're gone? Seneca considered this as he had considered everything, with careful attention to truth rather than comfort. "What we've built in ourselves will end with us," he said. "What we've built in others, that has its own life now." The afternoon was fading toward evening when they took their places in the warm water the physician had prepared. Their hands remained joined, their voices calm as they spoke their final words to the friends who had gathered to witness this demonstration of Stoic principle in practice. Remember, Seneca said to his students, that we die as we have lived, with gratitude for what has been given, acceptance of what cannot be changed, and hope for what we leave behind. The process was gentle, almost peaceful. Consciousness faded gradually, like the dimming of lamplight at day's end. There was no struggle, no last-minute panic or regret. Only the quiet dignity of two people who had prepared for this moment through decades of philosophical practice. But the story doesn't end there, because in the midst of this ultimate demonstration of shared conviction, the imperial household intervened. Word had reached Nero that Seneca's wife intended to join him in death, and even the emperor found this excessive. Soldiers arrived with orders to prevent Paulina's death, binding her wounds and forcing her return to life. She would survive for several more years, bearing the scars of that interrupted choice, living with the knowledge that she had been prepared to follow her deepest convictions to their logical conclusion. Some might call this tragic. Others might see it as an opportunity to carry forward what they had built together. Seneca himself passed peacefully as the sun set over the Bay of Naples, his final act a testament to the principles he had spent his life exploring and teaching. No compromise, no pleading, no abandonment of the philosophical framework that had guided him through decades of public service and private study. As you lie there now, carrying your own weight, building your own legacy, consider what this ancient story might offer. Not its extreme circumstances, certainly, but its essential message about integrity under pressure, about maintaining your deepest values when the cost seems impossibly high. The challenges you face may not be matters of life and death, but they are no less real for that. The decision to uphold difficult principles when easier paths beckon. The choice to remain true to your vision when others counsel compromise. The daily practice of carrying your weight with dignity, regardless of whether anyone notices or appreciates the effort. Seneca's final act was simply the culmination of a lifetime spent preparing for such moments. Every morning's reflection, every evening's examination of conscience, every careful choice to align action with principle, all of it was preparation for the tests that would inevitably come. Your preparation continues even now, in this quiet moment between today's challenges and tomorrow's responsibilities, in the simple act of seeking rest without abandoning your commitments, in the practice of carrying weight without being crushed by it. Let the old philosopher's example settle into your consciousness like water finding its level, not as a burden to add to those you already carry, but as a reminder that integrity is possible even under impossible circumstances, that what you're building has value beyond immediate results, that the weight you carry it well. And legacy of peace, a final reflection. The villa grows quiet now, not with the silence of endings, but with the deeper quiet of understanding. You know this feeling, don't you? Those rare moments when the constant churn of decisions and deadlines pauses, when clarity emerges from chaos like dawn breaking over troubled waters. Seneca's final hours echo through centuries, not because they were perfect, but because they were purposeful. Because in the face of ultimate pressure, he chose to remain who he was rather than become what fear demanded. The Bay of Naples holds its beauty still, as it did that morning when imperial riders first appeared on the horizon. The same light that illuminated Seneca's final letters now touches other shores, other lives, other moments of choice between courage and convenience. Time moves forward, but wisdom settles into the bedrock of human experience, waiting for those who need it most. Waiting for you, perhaps, in those 2 a.m. moments when the weight of what you're building feels almost too much to bear. Consider how Seneca's legacy lived on, not in the marble halls of empire, but in the quiet corners where people faced their own impossible circumstances. His letters, written in stolen moments between the demands of politics and philosophy, found their way to readers he would never meet. Traders on distant roads, mothers raising children through uncertainty, leaders making decisions that would ripple through generations, each finding in his words not escape from responsibility, but the strength to carry it with grace. This is what endures when the immediate pressures fade into memory. Not the perfect execution of every plan, but the integrity you maintained while executing them. Not the absence of fear, but your choice to act wisely despite it. Not the elimination of weight from your shoulders, but the development of strength to carry what matters most. Seneca understood this in his final hours, as the shadows lengthened across his villa and the last light painted the water gold. The ancient Stoics spoke of preferred indifference, those things we naturally want but cannot ultimately control. Success, recognition, the smooth execution of our best-laid plans. Seneca had built a life around such things, accumulating wealth and influence that would have impressed any generation. Yet when forced to choose between those external goods and his internal compass, the choice came clearly. The villa, the riches, the position at court, all preferred indifference. His character, his principles, his commitment to wisdom over convenience, these alone belong truly to him. You carry similar choices each day, though perhaps in smaller moments. The choice to respond with patience when pressure mounts. The choice to maintain your values when shortcuts beckon. The choice to treat people with dignity even when they cannot immediately advance your cause. These decisions, invisible to most observers, shape the legacy you're building more than any quarterly report or strategic milestone. They accumulate like sediment in a riverbed, forming the foundation upon which everything else rests. The villa stands empty now in our imagination, but it was never the building that mattered. It was what happened within those walls, the conversations that stretched toward truth, the letters that wrestled with timeless questions, the daily practice of choosing wisdom over mere cleverness. These activities require no special location, no particular circumstances. They need only a mind willing to engage with what matters most, even when, especially when, external pressures suggest otherwise. Think of Seneca in his final bath, preparing himself not for defeat but for the ultimate demonstration of his principles. The water was warm, the room peaceful, his mind clear. He had spent decades training for this moment without knowing it would come. Every morning meditation, every evening reflection, every choice to pause before reacting in anger. All preparation for a test he never wanted to face, but faced nonetheless with dignity intact. You are preparing similarly, though your tests take different forms. The difficult conversation you've been postponing, the decision that will affect dozens of people who trust your judgment, the moment when your values will cost you something you want to keep. These preparations happen in quiet moments like this one, when you allow yourself to remember what matters most, when you reconnect with the principles that guide your best decisions, when you practice carrying weight without letting it crush your spirit. The physician who attended Seneca's final hours left no detailed record, but we can imagine his perspective. Here was a man facing death not as a victim, but as a philosopher completing his greatest lesson. No panic, no desperate bargaining with fate, no collapse of the persona he had spent a lifetime building. Instead, consistency. The same measured consideration he brought to questions of ethics and governance now applied to the ultimate transition. This is what it means to live an integrated life, when your private moments align with your public principles, when crisis reveals not hidden weakness but practiced strength. Your own moments of integration come more frequently than you might realize. Each time you choose transparency over convenient deception. Each time you prioritize long-term relationships over short-term gains. Each time you admit uncertainty rather than pretending to know more than you do. These choices, made when no one is watching or when everyone is watching, weave together into the fabric of who you're becoming. They matter more than you know, especially when you're too tired to see their significance clearly. The friends and disciples who gathered around Seneca in his final hours carried his teachings forward, not as rigid doctrine, but as living principles tested under ultimate pressure. They had witnessed philosophy in action, seen how years of practice prepared someone for an impossible situation. This is how wisdom truly spreads, not through perfect lectures, but through imperfect people choosing to live by their highest understanding, especially when it's difficult to do so. You are part of this same tradition, whether you recognize it or not. Every leader who chooses character over convenience extends a line of influence that reaches back through centuries of similar choices. Every decision to treat people with dignity, to tell difficult truths, to maintain integrity under pressure, these connect you to a legacy much larger than any single venture or achievement. You're building something that will outlast the immediate pressures keeping you awake tonight. The sunset that painted Seneca's villa in gold that final evening was not different from countless sunsets before it, yet it carried the weight of completion. Not because his life was ending, but because it had been lived with intention. The same light that witnesses your struggles tonight has witnessed the struggles of everyone who has ever tried to build something meaningful while maintaining their humanity. You are not alone in carrying this weight, even when it feels isolating. You are part of a conversation that spans generations, a conversation about how to live well under pressure, how to lead with wisdom, how to create value without losing your soul in the process. The water in Seneca's final bath grew cool as evening approached, but his clarity remained warm. He had found what the Stoics called ataraxia, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of deep peace beneath whatever surface turbulence life might bring. This peace is available to you as well, not as escape from responsibility, but as the foundation that makes carrying responsibility sustainable. It comes through practice, through the daily choice to align your actions with your deepest values, through the gradual development of strength that can bear weight without breaking. As we prepare to let this ancient story settle into rest, consider how Seneca's villa must have looked in the hours after his death. The same beautiful view across the Bay of Naples, the same elegant rooms where philosophy had been lived rather than merely discussed, the same writing desk where letters of wisdom had been composed for friends facing their own struggles. Nothing changed, yet everything was different. A life had been completed with integrity intact. A legacy had been sealed not in marble, but in the example of how to face impossible circumstances with grace. Your own legacy is being written in similar moments, not in the dramatic crises that make headlines, but in the quiet choices that reveal character. The way you treat the person who cannot help your career advance. The decision to tell the truth when a half-truth would be easier. The choice to maintain hope when cynicism offers simpler explanations. These moments accumulate like stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, invisible individually but creating together a pattern of light that can guide others through their own dark passages. Let the weight you carry settle now into something sustainable, the way Seneca's final teachings settled into the hearts of those who heard them, the way his letters continue to speak across centuries to anyone facing the eternal challenge of living with integrity under pressure, the way this ancient story of courage and wisdom can become part of your own story, not as burden, but as reminder that what you're building has roots deeper than quarterly results and branches that will shade generations. You'll never meet, that the choices you make in moments of pressure echo forward through time like ripples spreading across still water, that your commitment to doing right even when it's difficult contributes to a legacy of leadership that honors both the practical demands of building something meaningful and the timeless human need for dignity, purpose, and peace.